Did he say he was going to give us a countdown? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Akshay Anand, and I'm going to be your host for this live stream. For those of you who are wondering what this is about, I know it says ITIL turns 2, which is perhaps slightly misleading. It's ITIL 4 turns 2, and I should have made that a bit clearer in my in the write-up. But we are celebrating the second anniversary of the launch of ITIL 4 Foundation, which was first published and launched on February 28th, 2019. And what I thought would be a really great idea was to bring back the original team that worked on ITIL 4 Foundation, designing a lot of the new concepts, regardless of where they appeared in the book or whether they appeared on the syllabus or not. That's an entirely different question. But Foundation was a game-changing piece of work. We see the effects rippling across our industry to this day. And so joining me today are three of my absolute favorite people in the world. Starting from, I guess I'll go clockwise. So starting from the left is Katrina McDermott, who is a consultant trainer based out in Sydney, Australia, if there's any other Sydneys out there. But Katrina was in charge, if I can put it that way, with developing the concept of the golden thread. And I think that landed so well that we continued it for every single book subsequently. And we understood how storytelling could enhance the reading experience and the learning experience. So Katrina was absolutely instrumental in shaping what ITIL 4 books started to look like. And she joins us today, as I said, from Sydney, Australia, as is Erin Castile. Erin is a consultant in fields as diverse as governance, business relationship management, service management. She does a lot of work with various ISO committees, probably too many to name, to list as part of an intro, but she's very, very active in the APAC region, and she joins us from Sydney, as I said, where I believe it's raining really heavily. So if you do pick up any sort of background noise from her microphone, we do apologize in advance, but it's one of I'm told it's a 1 in 100-year storm, so we can't help that. But last, but certainly by no means least, is Takashi Yagi, who's joining us from Tokyo. Mr. Yagi works for Hitachi, but he's also a very active member of the board of ITSM Japan, helping, coaching, guiding the service management community in that part of the world, as well as organizing annual conferences and various events. So the panel you see in front of you is the APAC panel. And later this week, I'll be hosting a similar panel for the Americas as well as for EMEA, calling on the lead architect team members who are in these parts of the world. So now that we've got the intros out of the way, let's start talking about ITIL 4. And let's start by actually going back in time to thinking of the state of affairs, the state of play back in 2017, 2018, ITIL, the development work on ITIL was announced at Fusion back in 2017, and we had a lot of people signing up to take part, either to take part in surveys or, such as yourselves, take part in actively developing and reviewing the content. So putting ourselves back in time, what were some of the good things that you were seeing in service management, or even in ITIL version 3, that you felt needed to be preserved and held onto? And this time I'll go west to east. So Takashi, I'll come to you first. What would you find from ITIL version 3 which you felt was important to hold on to?
Well, service lifecycle was introduced in version 3, and in Japan we believe that the service lifecycle concept was key for the organization to adopt version 3 successfully in Japan. In Japan, most of the IT organizations are heavily rely on external service providers. Typical ratio, I would say, is 1 to 2. So if the organization has 3,000 staff, this means that 1,000 are internal and 2,000 are external providers. And there are different players in each stage of the service life cycle, And it's important for the organization to work collaboratively with these internal provider and external provider in each stage of the service lifecycle. And other thing was a CSI concept, which was introduced. And in Japan, PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act concept, and 5W1H, which is a who, what, where, when, why, how approach to improvement was widely adopted. So CSI concept introduced in version 3 was adopted easily. And I think these are two concepts were important in ITIL version 3.
I'll stay with you for a moment, Takashi. What challenges or frustrations did you see the IT community in Japan having at that time as well, which you thought ITIL 4 could help address?
Well, when version 3 was introduced, most of the organizations struggled adopting service strategy and service design because most of the people who are working on service strategy and service design were not familiar with ITIL at the moment, and they are not happy adopting ITIL. So many organizations had issue, although the service life cycle approach was important. But well, ITIL 4 has changed the concept. So, you know, you have the totally different view of the, this service life cycle. So it may help adopting ITIL, but the concept of the service life cycle, which was introduced in the version 3 using the ITIL 4, but in Japan, ITIL 4 has not really adopted yet. So we have to see how it will be, successful or not.
Sure, and part of that is, of course, comes down to the translations timeline and so on. So
yes.
Yeah, absolutely, we will see how well ITIL 4 lands in Japan.
Yes.
Continuing from west to east. Now, between Katrina and Erin, I'm not sure who's the westernmost in Sydney, so I'll stick to the order on my screen. So I'll come to you, Erin, with the same question. What positive things did you see in the ITSM and ITIL space back in 2017, and equally, what sort of frustrations do you think the community had an opportunity to address with what ended up being ITIL 4?
Okay, so I absolutely agree with Yagi-san that the service lifecycle was the fundamental change and value add with version 3. I've actually been around long enough that I started right at the end of ITIL version 1 and spent many years working with ITIL version 2. So for me, that adoption of the service lifecycle approach addressed something that was really important, albeit an initial version, which was a way of describing the fact that all of these different practices in ITIL don't exist as silos, but that they all need to work together in an integrated way. So it was kind of an initial version of that, but it was incredibly important because, as we all appreciate, having ITIL practices as silos absolutely isn't going to get you there. Now, I'll say with the caveat that while I think, at least theoretically, the service life cycle helped people and organizations begin to understand that, it was potentially, for many of them, still theoretical because, on the one hand, there was the confusion, and this is where I'm going to kind of segue into how ITIL 4 is addressing some of the issues. There was the confusion that we are all aware of, which is that the way that the version 3 books were put together, there were separate sets of processes for each of those books, and people, of course, not all people, but a number of people in organizations misinterpreted that to mean that that process only belonged in that phase of the life cycle, which created a lot of confusion for organizations and made it difficult, if not impossible, to implement. So we, as a lead architect team, put a lot of effort, of course, into addressing that and making sure that people really understood that, yes, absolutely, all these things need to work together in an integrated way as a system, but that it is the value stream approach that changes depending on what it is that you're trying to do. So I am a strong advocate for the improvement that we've made there. And while I appreciate that it always takes a while for organizations to, adopt the new thing, especially if they've been, version 3 was around since 2007, so it was around for quite a long time. And the service lifecycle was deeply embedded into the way that organizations were thinking about service management for such a long time that it's not something that's going to get completely changed.
Old habits die hard, right?
But it was necessary for us to deal with it.
Of course. And last, again, but by no means least, Katrina. Now, for those of you who are not aware of this, Katrina McDermott is an ITIL master. She pursued ITIL qualifications all the way to the very, very top of what it means to learn about ITIL, for which we're probably going to be talking to her at some point this year about what it means to be an ITIL master and so on. But I think, Katrina, being an ITIL master, as well as your focus on human-centric design and working on the golden thread, etc., there must have been a lot of ideas swirling in your mind, in the lead up to the development of ITIL 4. So, from your perspective, what do you think was working but equally not working in the field of ITIL and ITSM?
Well, thank you for that accolade. I do very much agree with what Erin was saying. I'm just writing down notes. That to do the masters, I had to study each book, and there were hefty, pretty meaty books that I had to read, and especially service strategy. I remember studying it, and I'm like, there's some really great stuff in here. And my research showed that really where ITIL proved to be used the most was in operations. So many of the folk, IT professionals, used ITIL in operations, and that's where I felt the most use of it, for want of a better word, was used. But I think that where I found ITIL to be the most useful for me, I worked for Qantas Airways, and I negotiated their service contracts with the largest service providers. And what ITIL did was provide an operating model for the airline and for the service providers to understand how the airline wanted to operate. And Erin, back to your point about these very soloed in ITIL 3 that are processed sat in a phase of the life cycle. I mean, we had a service provider say to us that we don't do problem management. It's not in our contract to do that. And that's ludicrous, obviously, because problem management sits within the whole phase of life cycle. So I think that was one, for want of a better word, criticism, insights that I found, that in contracts, it was very stipulated against the life cycle, and that in some ways didn't create the most healthy or best partnership that possibly could have. And I feel what ITIL 4 is now doing is taking that solid approach away, and as Erin said, working more within value streams rather than defined processes and practices.
Yeah, fair point. I'll probably throw a couple of observations in the mix. I think ITIL does, of course, a lot of people talk about ITIL as providing that common taxonomy and common language and set of concepts to IT organizations. But I think that it's one of those things that they just sometimes just seems to get said or talking about as not dismissively, but I don't think people understand quite what the impact of something that fundamental could be. The nearest analogy would be, if you don't know your letters of A to Z, then how are you going to put together the words of a book, for example? So knowing
Right.
that fundamental language, that fundamental alphabet of IT or IT service management helps you create so much more wealth and value later on. And that's something that I think was very valuable in all previous versions of ITIL that we needed to make sure we preserved. We've talked about operating models versus organizational models. Both you and Erin. Sorry, my neighbor's dog is going nuts right now. Probably saw a squirrel in the garden or something. But I think one of the interesting things that I saw was a lack of understanding of the difference between governance and management within IT organizations, or at least governance seemed to be something that somebody else outside of IT did, or it was only in very large organizations which invested in. Now, Erin, you'll have to hold me to account. I always forget which ISO standard talks of IT governance. I think it's
38500.
Yeah, there you go. Woo, I got it right finally. So, it was only organizations that maybe went down that route that had a better understanding of the difference between governance and management. And I think, again, with ITIL 4, with the service value system, we were able to clearly articulate that governance is separated from management practices. So that was an interesting thing that I also saw outside of the common frustration that an operating model ended up becoming an organizational model for many organizations. Let's move on to the actual development program itself. I mean, it took. The primary development I think started around October 2017 and went all the way up to I think I want to say September, October of 2018.
Yeah, it was a year.
Before something like that. What are your fondest memories? I mean, look, we'll all be upfront and honest about it. There were some difficult discussions, right? We all had those difficult discussions. Some of us walked away winning the argument. In my case, I was the punching bag of the room.
No.
I lost more arguments, but you know what? For me, I thought it was better to provoke the discussion rather than trying to score points. So that was what I took away from it. But what were your favorite memories of the development process? And this time, let's go in the reverse order. So Katrina, I'll come to you first with this one. What were some of your fondest memories from that development, that year of development?
I guess if I go back a little bit, Akshay, that I had a meeting with, not a meeting, we went out for lunch with Ronan, and I was a reviewer initially of ITIL 4. And I was reading the manuscripts, and I did, and I'll be totally honest, I did feel that, it was great context, but the way it was being messaged could have been better. And as you mentioned earlier, that I also specialise in human-centred design. And you've heard me say this before, actually, that when I was doing my master's, and Erin, how many pages in all those books, like probably about 5,000 that we have to read. And there was not one picture of a human or a person in all those books. And that's something that really resonated with me when I read this great content, but there's no people. And that's why we're here. We're here to provide great service to people. And so I managed to convince AXELOS, and I'm very, very fantastic that you took up my idea of incorporating people into the books. So that's a highlight of what I did. Frustration, timelines, always. But it was a joy to have the opportunity, if I'm going to be very honest, and Tom and Michael and the crew there were just terrific. I loved it, to be honest. Yeah, it was a great opportunity.
Brilliant. And Erin, I'll come to you with the same question again. What were some of the sort of highlights of that 1 year of very intense workshopping and writing and debate?
Well, the highlight for me was working with the lead architecture team. Those week-long meetings with us squished together in the meeting room in London for a week at a time were absolutely wonderful. And it is such a great group of people, and the fact that we were each and are coming from different perspectives and from different parts of the world, but we all loved ITIL and we wanted to make it the best it could possibly be. And yes, that took a little bit of argument, and
the code word is passionate debate, Erin.
Right. Well, it absolutely was, but that was because everybody really cared enough to make it the best that we could possibly make it. And it also really helped because, we would do that and then we would go away and we would work individually and virtually. But the fact that you had a really good understanding of where the other people were coming from made it possible. So that then when you had the next go, we were that much closer and that much further along on the journey. So that was the absolute highlight. And then my other, I guess, strongest memory was just the endless drafts that Roman and I were passing back and forth. It must have been, I don't know, it feels like it was more than 100 back and forth between us. And that finally at the very end, we had sorted out with the final version of the foundation book, everything, but I think like 2 or 3 issues, and we had to bring Stuart in. Oh, sorry. We had to bring Stuart in as the mediator to get those last. But it was like one last call, and I just felt so elated, like, wow, we've just done it. And I have to say, look, and I know that it's been said before, but Roman was definitely the MVP of this project. He just kept challenging and asking questions that needed to be asked, as did you, of course, Akshay, and it was great.
Amazing. And last, but again, by no means least, Takashi, what were your sort of memories of that development, that year of development? I think you're on mute.
I joined the workshop from the second workshop, which held in January of the 2018. And due to my language issue, I was not able to participate much on the discussion, but I think we had a lot of good discussion. And, just the terminology, for instance, process against practice, I wonder how much it took us to decide we're gonna change from the process to practice. And yeah, value streams, they.
Oh, I think we may have lost him.
Rose, oh no.
I think we may have lost him.
See, actually, it's value streams.
Well, on that high note, all right, we'll continue the discussion, and hopefully Takashi is able to solve his broadband issues. But I'll share some memories of my own. I remember one of the things I remember was how many revisions of diagrams we went through. I mean, We've got like the service value chain diagram that we all know and love, but I still have early sketches of what it looked like back in sort of March of 2018, and I remember getting the feedback. I don't know from whom, but I remember getting the feedback that it was a very 80s or very 90s management consulting diagram that we had to share. And I remember working with Ricky, our graphics design specialist. I remember working with him through so many cycles, so many iterations of not just the service value chain diagram, but even if you remember the diagram of the 4 circles and how resources flow from one organization to another through the form of services. And I think just trying to get those diagrams to land, because again, a diagram is an imperfect representation of what we're writing, and what we're writing is an imperfect representation of what's actually happening. And that is something you have to accept as you develop a framework, that any model is at best an imperfect representation of what it's actually like.
Always.
The other thing that for me, I remember a post-it note exercise. Erin, I don't know if you remember this. On one of the walls,
Yes.
I'd written down all 26 processes and four functions and put
Right.
them up on a wall. And I literally had a masking tape across the wall that said, anything above this line we keep, anything below this line we drop. And we were debating whether to keep access management and change, what was it called? Change evaluation. And we went through every single thing, and we debated whether or not it had a place in the new version of ITIL, because we were expanding the scope of the practices as well.
Right.
So that was another. I think I may have a photo of that somewhere, but that was.
And then
another
we clustered them. Remember, we'd had like 14 different ways that we could cluster the practices too.
That's right.
So yeah, fun times. Hey.
I remember we actually had 6 categorizations of practices first.
Right.
And you guys may remember that we went through this, again, several series of, do we need any sort of categorization, or should we just have like a random, like an alphabetical list of 34 practices?
Right.
Or do we need some sort of categorization? That was another fascinating topic. Takashi, welcome back.
Yay.
Sorry, somehow my Mac crashed and I had to, it restarted. So it took some time to access to the systems. I'm sorry.
Not a problem. These things happen. Harry, I just want to check you don't need us to pause to rebroadcast. Okay, brilliant. So Takashi, you were talking about how some of these you were recalling some of these discussions around value streams.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Would you if you can complete your thoughts on that?
So we had a lot of discussion, and we had a good meeting. Not only the good meeting, but good discussion on the dinner or drinking. And I really enjoy working with the LAT teams members. Thank you.
Thinking back, I think we solved more problems over dinner and drinks than we did after like 8 hours of intense debating in a group.
And you took us to that super cool bar that was like from around the world in 80 days.
That's right. There's a really nice bar here in London called Mr. Fogg's Residence.
Right.
Definitely do recommend it for people who are visiting. It's an experience. So let's move on. There are a couple of questions coming in from the audience, so I'd like to keep the last like 10 or 15 minutes for that. The reception to ITIL 4 over the years. How has ITIL 4 landed in your part of the world? What sort of successes have you seen? Where do you find people might be challenged to get their heads around some of the things that we've published and that we continue to publish even? And how are you helping your sort of local communities with that? And I'll go reverse order this time again. So start with Katrina on this one. So you're in the hot seat, Katrina. What sort of things have you seen really land well, resonate well, and equally, where do you see some of the challenges now emerging in response?
So I'll start with the challenges. I think, in my humble opinion, ITIL was perceived as being out of date, too prescriptive. We have people in digital saying it's no longer relevant, etc., etc. So that's my research and my perspective. That's what I felt that ITIL was. And again, as I said earlier, I feel the main use of ITIL was in IT operations, that it did a great job. But again, this perception is very prescriptive. We need to be more agile. We need to deliver quicker to our customers. It holds us back. So that was that. Then one of the highlights of ITIL 4 was I was training the digital team at Jetstar Airlines. And I don't know if I emailed you this actually, but the gentleman said to me, this is really good. That's so clever what they've done. And I'm like, what? And I said, why do you say that? And they really loved the new concept of the service value chain, how it allowed you to go, back forward, and you wasn't so linear. So that was great, and I think that really, because it was relatively new to me too. I had to train it, and you're learning a lot as you go, because it was so in some respects a lot different, but in other respects the same. So it was great to have someone explaining real life application outside of IT operations of ITIL 4. I felt that was a really great thing. I still, as we said in Vegas, Akshay, I do find people find the concept of value chains and value streams very, very difficult to grasp.
Yeah.
I don't know if our other attendees have that challenge. But besides that, I think that, it is bringing a new refreshing light into ITIL and attracting, I dare say, younger audiences, where I think there was a bit of a challenge beforehand. I think there's a long way to go, especially in our region, to really promote, how great ITIL 4 is. But, I'm working with AXELOS and other colleagues to promote that.
Excellent. And Erin, I'll come to you with that same question. So how you do work, Katrina works around the world. I know she's been to France as part of some of the work with some of her aviation clients, for example. If I recall correctly, you do a lot of work in the APAC region, so not just Australia, but across the APAC region. How have you seen ITIL 4 land in that region with your clients? What sort of successes have you seen? How are you finding the adoption and your own promotion and coaching of your clients? What's your experience been like?
So as you mentioned at the beginning, Akshay, I work with organizations as a strategist and a business architect to optimize the governance and the management of their organization so that it can thrive in our VUCA world. Do you need me to say what VUCA is, Akshay?
Sure. There may be some people who don't know what VUCA is.
Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And as you also mentioned, I've worked with ISO for many years on management system standards, including 20,000 for service management, which is where I met Yagi-san many years ago, and the 27,000 series for information security management. And now I'm working on the next paradigm for organizational systems in the digital age, which is value systems. And that is the approach that I am taking to provide a context for organizations on why is the service value system essential for you in the digital age, right? So what I basically describe is that the service value system represents the next paradigm in the evolution of management systems, because it includes all the components that an organization of any type, size, industry sector needs, but simplified so that it can be more adaptive. And as we understand, and exactly as Katrina just said, what we need to be is adaptive rather than constrained by an entirely prescriptive system. So the other aspects of it, of course, and we could go on, but the fact that it's ensuring that we're working in an integrated way, but also that we're always focused on value. And the last thing that I would want to, or I guess the last things that I bring in about that would be that the value chain that sits at the center of the service value system can also be swapped out for other value chains depending on the context for the organization. And I have done that with organizations. So, for example, a value chain that was exploration, development, production, because that was the value chain that was relevant for them. And you can also have multiple value chains that sit in the center, and it still works. The other thing is the 4 dimensions of service management, and you mentioned the the difficulty we had in trying to come up with the best way to represent that visually. But it's quite important that we really emphasized the 4 dimensions, because in the digital age, we have to look at everything through these multi-perspectives. So what I do is I lay the 4 dimensions sort of on top of and surrounding the value system so that people can understand that they really need to embed those different perspectives into every decision, every practice, etc. And when you show them, because every organization has a management system, whether or not they call it that or not, and you're just talking about, this is what you already have the pieces of this. Here's how we can help to evolve your organization to be more adaptive, less prescriptive, using these tools, and that tends to resonate quite well, because it's what everybody needs to achieve now.
Yeah. And Takashi, I know you mentioned in the beginning that due to the translations timeline, ITIL 4 hasn't had the same sort of 2-year life cycle in Japan. But I do know that there have been some publications, some talks, a little bit, there's a little bit of a foothold, if you will, up to this point, rather than, the full suite of ITIL 4 being released in that region. Have you seen any shifts, any changes based on ITIL 4 in that part of the world?
Well, I understand that some of the major consulting organizations found out that they could use ITIL 4 as a foundation for helping some of the digital organization to develop their organization. But, as I said, because localization is key in Japan, most of the organization is still waiting for the content to be localized. So unless we have the local content, it will be difficult for us to have the ITIL 4 as a mainstream in Japan. And that's the situation. And as you said, we are waiting for more than a year to initiate the project to localize it, but it hasn't happened. So, actually, we are waiting. That, according to some of your people, we should be able to begin anytime, but it's been like 6 months since then. So we really wonder when we can initiate it.
Sure. Let me perhaps ask a slightly speculative question then. What of the which of the concepts of ITIL 4 do you think would resonate the most with ITSM practitioners in Japan?
Well, most of the organization, because we introduce ITIL as a process approach, and they want to look at the practices, and they want practices to be translated, and then they want to look after the value systems or value streams, and so that they have the entire picture of the ITIL 4. And that's one of the critical things we have to do.
Sure. Yeah. I'll throw in a couple of observations before we wrap our discussion up and head to the audience questions. Now, of course, I don't work in a specific part of the world. I have more conversations rather than consulting engagements or sort of day-to-day work with people in different parts of the world. There are a few things which I think we should all be rightly proud of with our work and how ITIL 4 has changed our community. I think there's a lot more talk on concepts like value now,
right?
Whereas previously people weren't talking about that. And related to that is also the uptake of things like the guiding principles. I think the guiding principles are being seen, rightly so, are being seen as a catalyst for some sort of organizational change. But I also think the guiding principles are incredibly empowering to the individual. Like if I am an engineer or a change analyst or an incident analyst or someone in a relatively junior, I might not have any scope of influence or scope of control on how workflows are being designed or how procedures are being designed or whatever. But through the guiding principles and through the adoption of guiding principles, myself and all my colleagues around me, we can all be thinking about or focusing on value. We can be all thinking about what it means holistically when I make certain decisions. So at an individual level, I think the guiding principles are also incredibly empowering. And I see a lot of people, a lot of organizations really pick up on the concepts of the guiding principles and running with that and embedding that in their organizations.
Actually, sorry, can I just interrupt for a moment?
Sure, yeah.
I meant to say, when you asked me earlier, I think what ITIL 4 has done in my experience is it's a segue for change. Whereas, IT organizations typically weren't perceived as delivering value. I position ITIL 4 as it's a new way. And I always say, ITIL version 3 or early versions, a service provider delivered value. Now in ITIL 4, we talk about the co-creation of value. And it's very rewarding to me because, as you know, I do training. I've created TILI, and we really focus on that ITIL 4 training about how it's about value co-creation. I'll say I'm a bit embarrassed sometimes how I used to say to our providers, like, you're not delivering, this is what you should be doing. Whereas now the language is about how can we work better together for both us to get value. So I think that's a really important part of ITIL 4, and it's something that we really advocate in our training. And I think when you have that different mindset, that's what ITIL 4 has done. It's giving us a new way of working in IT and outside of IT. So yeah,
I agree. Yeah. Can I add something to that?
Yeah, sure, please go ahead.
So if you think about it, ITIL, starting with version 1, has always been aspirational. It has always been about showing organizations this is what is possible, and here are some great ideas. And it does take a while for those things to really permeate. And I completely agree with you, Akshay, that that real focus on value has permeated far more quickly than I imagined, and I'm so happy to say that. And I also agree with you so much about the guiding principles and the way that those have resonated. And one way that I talk about them is that they are an example of enabling constraints. Organizations traditionally have used very much more rigid governing constraints like policies and mandatory requirements. And enabling constraints are a much more adaptive kind of constraint that actually works incredibly well for organizations that are trying to evolve. So I think that it's kind of been the right thing at the right time, but I still only see this as just the beginning.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. There is one more point which I think has landed in an interesting way. I don't know whether to say in a good way or in a bad way. And I think Katrina mentioned this earlier. I see a lot more people talking about value streams and value stream mapping in our community, whereas prior to February 2019, a lot of the conversations around value stream mapping tended to be in the lean IT community or in the DevOps community. And I think value stream mapping, I think, provides a bridge across these multiple communities, and that's only for the better of all involved. But I do agree that we can be publishing more guidance about what value stream mapping is and contextualizing it to the needs of our community, our service management community. And in fact, that's something I'm actively talking about internally. So yeah, stay tuned to our audience. Stay tuned. You will start to see some good guidance coming out around what value stream mapping is and how to do it and so on. Until then, there is a chapter in the CDS book. So although value streams were introduced as a concept in Foundation. There's a lot more guidance in the Create, Deliver, and Support book, which even provides a couple of sort of starter templates for you to make a start with articulating your value stream and the steps in the value stream and so on. So you might want to take a look at that. So what we'll do now is switch to the audience questions. There have been a few questions coming in, some of them interesting. Darren asks, if you already have ITIL version 3 embedded, what is the best way to introduce ITIL 4 with minimal impact? And Erin, I'll come to you as someone who works a lot on the consulting side of amongst the four of us. Is this a conversation you've had with your clients, how to minimize the impact?
Look, so when we say we've got ITIL version 3 embedded, the first caveat you have to ask is, are we talking about all of those processes? Are we talking about the whole organization? Are we talking about just one part of the organization and just some of the processes? So, of course, there's a lot of questions there. So, as we say in the guiding principles, you have to start where you are, and you have to ask yourself, okay, here's where we've got the biggest points of pain, the things that need to be addressed, and it's always going to be about evolving those things over time. However, I want to just caution the idea of having a very prescriptive linear roadmap. In fact, I've got an article that's coming out tomorrow on ITSM tools. Sorry for this plug. It's all about why we don't want to use linear roadmaps anymore. What we want to do is think about the way that we do strategy and the way that we look at achieving objectives and the way we even define objectives in a few different ways. So this is a much longer conversation, and if Darren wants to contact me, I would love to talk to him about it more.
Sure.
That's a hefty conversation, but I would love to have it.
I'll probably throw in my 2 cents before I move to the next question for Takashi. I think one of the best ways in which to nudge organizations towards ITIL 4 is to ask them. I actually do have a talk about this based on the conversation I've had. I've found that there are sort of 3 distinct places from which your ITIL 4 journey can start. You can either start with adopting guiding principles, and I've seen a majority of organizations possibly starting with that sort of behavioral change, because at least, I hate to put it this way, but from a funding perspective, you don't have to secure funding for tool changes and rolling out vast complex programs. Right. Instead, you're investing in sort of coaching and mentoring and sort of behavioral changes in various parts of your organization. So I see a lot of organizations starting their journey with guiding principles. Equally, I do see some organizations starting with value stream mapping, understanding how they're working right now. But in order to get the most out of that exercise, you still have to draw upon the guiding principles. You still have to sort of consider what can you push towards continual improvement, what needs to be a project in of its own right because of the complexity or scope involved. And the third place I see people starting from is continual improvement. Let's start putting together that backlog. Let's start getting those quick wins. Let's start to build that momentum and see what's coming up ahead and figuring out how we pivot as needed. But I want to come with the second question to yourself, Takashi, because we're talking about the start of the ITIL 4 journey for the organizations and practitioners in Japan, and we have a question from, I guess this is a company name, the Dynamic Medials. If it's a person's name, I would love to meet you. But we have a question from the Dynamic Medials. Great band name, by the way. That would be a great name for a band. Would you recommend organizations to go in for ITIL version 3 first before moving on to ITIL 4. So from a point of view of new companies or companies looking to figure out where their investments over the next few years are going to be, would you recommend going all in on ITIL version 3 before you're ready to go with ITIL 4, or would you think that there's scope for organizations to immediately jump to ITIL 4's guidance?
Well, I just said ITIL, in order for organization to adopt ITIL 4, localization is key. But if you have a choice of, adopting ITIL version 3 versus ITIL 4, I recommend to just jump into ITIL 4. Just adopting ITIL version 3 and moving to ITIL 4 quickly is just making the confusion to the organization. And I don't think it's a good idea. So if you need to adopt ITIL 4 right away, you have to use English content. But I think that's a recommendation, I would say.
Sure, and I'm sure that you were pointing out earlier that there are a number of consultants and trainers who are starting to publish books about ITIL for the benefit of the local audience. And I think there are some books on the marketplace which do offer maybe not the official AXELOS books yet, but certainly I think there is slowly we're starting to see some local content coming out. Katrina, I'll come to you for the next question, because this is possibly something you've encountered as you've trained, coached, and consulted with your clients. Alpesh asks, what do you think of how far do you think customers really understand and are ready or excited about their role in value co-creation?
Again, in my experience, once we explain the concept, I think very swiftly. I'm doing some work with some big government departments at the moment, and that have done the ITIL training. And it is that I think the best or the most important thing that my students, not just mine, take away from ITIL is about the value. It's the key word, and I think that's terrific, and I think that it's fundamental. That's the message that we get across from training, consulting, these webinars, etc., etc. It's not about, what we quite often say, it's not about how good your SLAs are or, how many incidents you have per month. And because, as I often say, the business don't care if your incidents are 20% down. What does that mean? They care about the value that you're delivering. So once that is explained, and from top to bottom, obviously it has to come from the top. So if you can get in and train the very senior people in an organisation, once they get it, feeds down. So absolutely, very successfully, it can be embedded and understood.
Yeah, I completely agree. It reminds me of a question I got asked at, I think, ITSM UK 2019. Well, it had to be 2019. The 2020 conference was virtual. This was a question in a panel discussion in a room, and I was asked who should be the people who take ITIL 4 Foundation first, because of course we see a lot of people taking ITIL 4 Foundation from areas such as the service desk or engineering teams or development teams and so on. And I said, look, if you want to think outside the box, it should really be your senior stakeholders, your senior leaders who are taking ITIL 4 Foundation first, because the worst thing that could happen to someone who is enthused and excited about all into an organization which doesn't allow them or enable them to actually apply what they've learned. So you need to be able to change the system to empower and give your staff the tools to really make a difference. So I think I absolutely agree with that, Katrina, that you need to start to push the training to your leaders first, or in parallel with training everybody else.
In our model, actually, if we're training, which is my preference, I prefer to train an organisation rather than individuals, but that's my preference. We mandate that we have the senior person in that training. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
we've got 3 minutes left, so let me wrap this up by saying thank you to our wonderful panel, as well as Harry, who's been running the production in the background. Where can people find you if they want to contact you about? I mean, Erin, you also offered to talk to Darren a bit more, but where can people find you or contact you to invite you to talk to them or their teams and so on? Katrina, where can people find you?
Probably best on my website. So it's katrinamcdermott.com or via LinkedIn, and really be happy and very excited to speak to any of our attendees about our unique training of ITIL Foundation and other modules. So on my website would probably be the best. Thank you.
Excellent. And Erin, how can people get in touch with you?
LinkedIn is definitely the easiest way. So are you going to put the links below this for people to look at later?
Quite likely, yes.
Okay, so if they can't find me, Erin Castile, on LinkedIn, then maybe they can come back and have a look for the link that you pop in after the fact.
Absolutely. Lovely. And Takashi, where can people find you if they want to talk to you about anything?
Oh, LinkedIn, and just send me the message saying that you saw this video, and I will discuss with you.
That actually, the same with me. I get dozens of requests per week, and most of them don't have any context or explanation about why they want to contact me. So it becomes very difficult sometimes. But to our audience, thank you for joining us this morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are in the world. As I said at the start of the discussion, I'll be running a couple more sessions later this week. On Wednesday afternoon, UK time, which is going to be the Americas session, and we'll be joined there by the lead architect team members from that part of the world. So we've got Lou Honeybeck, Troy Dumoulin, and Mauricio Corona joining us. And then Friday lunchtime GMT, we're doing the EMEA session, and that will feature Roman Zhuravlev, Marcel Federer, Stuart Rance, Barclay Ray, and of course myself hosting. So I hope if you can make it to one of those, you come and join us in the celebration of ITIL 4 turning 2, and maybe that conversation will be slightly different. You may have other questions, so we welcome any and all questions. You can find me on Twitter at Blowboy, or on LinkedIn, of course. Please, as Takashi said, add a note to say why you're connecting. But you can also email us at ask@axelos.com. Sorry, that's a bit of a tongue twister. If you have any questions or comments or any sort of feedback about this session that we've just had. So until next time, folks, please stay safe and remember to wash your hands.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you later.